Welcome, everyone. So nice to see you here at this lecture. I am Anita Krug, Dean of Chicago-Kent College of Law, and it is wonderful to welcome each of you to our annual Palmer Lecture to honor this year's recipient of the Chicago-Kent Roy C. Palmer Civil Liberties Prize. And the Palmer Prize was established in 2007 by a Chicago-Kent alumnus, Roy Palmer, and his wife, Susan Palmer, to honor the exemplary works of scholarship that explores the tension between civil liberties and national security in contemporary American society. And we've since kind of expanded that theme just slightly and continue to receive wonderful submissions. So just to give you a bit of information about Roy C. Palmer, he was a lawyer and real estate developer, a 1962 honors graduate of Chicago-Kent, and a member of Chicago-Kent's Board of Advisors. In 2012, he received the Chicago-Kent Alumni Association's Distinguished Service Award, and in 2013, he was named as one of our 125 alumni of distinction. Before his death in 2017, he and Mrs. Palmer were active in numerous civic, social, and philanthropic organizations. And I want to welcome Susan Palmer here today. She's in the front row. And as well as her guests, Jim and Charlie Ann Cypret, who are sitting next to her. So welcome all of you. It's so nice to have you here. And today, joining our list of distinguished scholars who have won the Palmer Prize in past years is Neil Richards, Koch Distinguished Professor of Law at Washington University School of Law in St. Louis, where he co-directs the Cordell Institute for Policy in Medicine and Law. We are honoring Professor Richards for his book, Why Privacy Matters, which was published by Oxford University Press in 2021.
Complicated quote. We can say 2022.
All right, let's say 2022. Okay. Professor Richards' scholarly work stands at the intersection of privacy law, information law, and freedom of expression. He writes, teaches, and lectures about the regulation of technologies powered by human information that we all know are revolutionizing society. And in addition to authoring Why Privacy Matters, Professor Richards is the author of the book Intellectual Privacy, published by Oxford University Press in 2015. And his writings on privacy and civil liberties have appeared in a wide variety of media, from the Harvard Law Review and the Yale Law Journal to The Guardian, Wired, and Slate Magazine. Professor Richards graduated from the University of Virginia School of Law and also holds a master's degree in legal history from the University of Virginia. And after graduating from law school, he served as a clerk to Chief Justice William Rehnquist of the U.S. Supreme Court and Judge Paul Niemeyer, U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit. So with all that, I welcome Professor Richards to the podium.
Thank you, Dean Krug. Thank you to everybody for coming today, for your hospitality, to Tasha Kincaid for her fantastic help with the arrangements, and of course to Susan Palmer, and my gratitude to Susan and Roy Palmer for their generosity, for their support of course I'm biased in many ways here, but of work that matters, right? The work that talks about and seeks to protect and advance civil liberties, civil rights, and our hard-won but ultimately potentially fragile commitments to the rule of law. These are things that need to be cherished and protected and celebrated, much more important than the talk that I'm going to be giving you today, but thank you. And it is an absolute pleasure to be with you to talk about why privacy matters. So the book comes about from a conversation that I have with people all the time, that I've had literally all over the world with waiters, with my family, with my friends, with the woman who cuts my hair. I'm getting a haircut tomorrow, so I'm thinking of her a lot. With people that I've stood next to, waiting in line at baseball games and soccer games, with people who are unfortunate enough to ask me what I do when they sit next to me on an airplane. It's a conversation about privacy and why privacy matters. And the conversation goes something like this. In fact, there was one time when I was on the book tour for intellectual privacy in the spring of 2015. I was invited to give a talk at Stanford Law School, and I was taking a car from my hotel in Palo Alto to the law school, a short ride. And I called an Uber, which was a new thing back then. And this is a conversation I have particularly with Uber, Lyft, and taxi drivers. The conversation goes something like this. The person will ask me what I do, and I'll say, I do privacy. Sorry. They ask me what I do, I say, I'm a law professor. And then they say, well, what kind of law do you do? Which is the thing, weirdly, like lawyers get asked. Like somehow, maybe it's just small talk. It's just a bizarre thing. What kind of law do you do? I do privacy law. And then one of two things happens. Either they'll say, oh, you must be very busy then, ha ha ha. And then other times, the more interesting times, they say something else. They say nothing for a moment. And then there's a little noise that comes out of their head. It's like something evaporating. And they go, well, privacy is dead. All of my information is out there. It's creepy. But at least I have nothing to hide, I guess. Or some variation on this theme. And this is exactly what happened in that Uber in Silicon Valley, of all places, in March of 2015. And so for the next 5.5 minutes, it was a short car ride, mercifully short for her, this Uber driver was subjected to a tirade, not a tirade, but sort of my explanation, but no, every piece of that is wrong. Privacy does matter, privacy is important, and here's why. And I realized in that conversation with that Uber driver, a conversation that I had had dozens, if not hundreds of times before, that maybe I should write this down. If only to save me from having to say it over and over again. So I owe a tremendous debt of gratitude as well, while I'm saying thank you, to that Uber driver, whoever she is. I don't know her name, but Uber does, and that's sort of the point. So the conversation that I had, the position that she took, privacy is dead, it's creepy, all my information is out there, but I have nothing to hide, I guess, is not a crazy position to take. It's not a crazy belief for someone to have. For example, I'm English, so this is my home country, not my home city. CCTV cameras in London, in Chicago, in St. Louis, all over the world are deployed. Drones are in our skies, all or almost all of them, with high-resolution video cameras. Sporting events are trialing the use of facial recognition technology, a dangerous technology of almost Orwellian perfection, in order to avoid the inconvenience of using a ticket in order to get in. Manchester City, when it's not, I'm a soccer fan too, when it's not acting as the sports-washing, smiley front face of a human rights-denying, environment-destroying petro-baron regime in the Middle East, which owns it, is also in the facial recognition business, or trialing the use of facial recognition technology in ways that people did not consent to. Of course, it would be illegal in Chicago because you have a privacy right that protects against that. It's not just sort of sinister sports washing organizations that are using facial recognition technology. Even beloved cultural treasures like Taylor Swift have started using facial scanning in order to detect stalkers that may be coming to her concert. So I suppose the next time you're at a concert, smile. Other privacy issues, I mean, if we think about the Snowden revelations, believe it or not, this June will be the 10th anniversary of Edward Snowden's revelations about the scope of NSA spying, starting a conversation about civil liberties and the rule of law that is continuing to this day. Most people know about the Cambridge Analytica scandal and the ways in which a British psychological warfare company was hired to intervene and may have had an effect on the presidential election of 2016 and the British Brexit referendum. Most people know that. Most people know relatively little about what actually happened with Cambridge Analytica, other than that it was bad, and it involved data, and it involved Facebook. Then there's these things, Internet of Things devices like the Amazon Alexa that are popping up all over our lives. I stayed in a hotel in Chicago a couple of years ago, and my hotel room came, for my convenience, with a broadband hi-fi listening device in the bedroom that my wife and I were renting for the weekend. This is not my wife. And to be clear, I don't know this woman. These are Amazon's publicity pictures. Amazon wants to have a listening device in every room of your house. Of course, we already have listening devices in every room of our house and cameras. I mean, these things have the same functionality and actually better processing than an Alexa. So my Uber driver was not wrong to be uneasy, perhaps to feel, as she said, creeped out by the proliferation of devices, of products, of services, of government programs that are collecting information about us in ways that we can scarcely comprehend, much less try to meaningfully control. So she thinks that privacy is dead. Now, so what I said to her that day, and what I'm going to say to you in a slightly longer form today, absolutely, there's no debate that privacy is under threat. The examples that I've given, examples you can readily bring to mind, I think will confirm that. But what I want to argue is that privacy is not dead, but rather privacy is up for grabs. What do I mean by that? Well, privacy is fundamentally about power. The most important thing I have to say today, if there's one thing that you leave, you're going to see this again several times during the talk, but if there's one thing you leave here today with, it is an understanding that why does privacy matter? Privacy matters because privacy is fundamentally about power. Information is power, as Francis Bacon recognized in the 13th century or something. Human information confers power over human beings. This is why companies and governments want to collect information about you. It's so they can influence your behavior, influence your preferences, get you to want to do what they want to do. And it's interesting that if we think about the archetypal organizations that push the agenda, push the argument of the death of privacy, the NSA and Facebook, both of these organizations understand why privacy matters. They know that they want to have your information, the NSA, so it can, in following its mission faithfully, detect, prevent, and perhaps investigate national security threats to the United States. Facebook, so they can sell you, well, they can sell you to advertisers so that you will buy things that the advertisers want you to buy. But think about these organizations. The NSA, is the NSA an organization committed to transparency and opacity? No, right? The NSA and Facebook surround themselves in layers of technical, legal, and operational secrecy because they know, and this is what the Snowden revelations were about, they know if we know what they're doing, we're going to ask questions, and we're going to demand change if we don't like what they're doing. So these organizations, I gave a talk at Facebook some years ago, and I had to sign an NDA before I could even walk in the door. They know the power of information because they want to get your information to pursue their ends. I'm not saying those ends are sinister or problematic yet, but what I am saying is they know the power of information to shape your behavior, to shape your preferences, but they also know the power of information that they themselves resist scrutiny, whether by the public or by regulators or their competitors. Surveillance of this sort, watching someone to change their behavior, is not necessarily bad. So we didn't have this when our children were small. We had walkie-talkie baby monitors, but I know there was at least one young parent in the audience, and I suspect that they have a baby monitor so that they can keep an eye on their child, because as all parents know, children are, particularly small children, are highly chaotic self-destruction devices, and they need to be watched and monitored and shaped towards socially beneficial, or at least non-self-destructive goals. We don't use a video baby monitor to keep track of our children. That is my wife, and these are my children. We do use Find My Friends, particularly now. One of our children is away at college. More relevant to you guys, the other guy is driving. So particularly if you come to St. Louis, stay off the roads. We use this to find out if, when they're driving in our very expensive cars, if they are safe, where they are. We do it with full, to their mind, bewildering and overbearing deep conversations about privacy and information ethics and transparency. And but we use it too. So I'm not saying that information collection is always bad. There are good uses for the collection of information. But what I am saying is that privacy is fundamentally about power. We want to keep our children safe. We want to keep them out of trouble. Other people use information in other ways, but always, or almost always, to influence the behavior of others. Okay, so what I want to talk about this afternoon is three things. First, I want to talk about what privacy is, how we should think about privacy, how we should talk about it, because how we think and talk about privacy, particularly now, really matters. Second, I'm going to dispel quickly a couple of myths around privacy. And third, I'm going to suggest three values that I think are important as we craft a new generation of privacy rules for the 21st century. All right, so what is privacy? Let me offer a working definition. I'm a law professor. We like to define things. The degree to which human information is neither known nor used. We can rework this a little bit, but just so that you know what I'm talking about. I'm talking about information. I'm not talking about decisional privacy or spatial privacy, though I'm also not talking about the constitutional privacy right to reproductive autonomy that was reversed by the Supreme Court last summer. However, there are relationships between the exercise of reproductive rights and information privacy, which is why red state prosecutors are so keen to obtain data from menstruation tracking apps and also the location of people they suspect may be crossing state lines, maybe somebody coming from Missouri to Illinois, in order to avail themselves of reproductive services. Second, it's information about humans. The same technologies I'm talking about can be used to monitor climate change and crop growth, the melting of the polar ice caps and sea levels. They can monitor where our pets go. Pets may have privacy rights, but I'm not talking about that today. Third, it's about information being used as well as known. Privacy questions, of course, involve the use of information, but they also involve whether information is collected in the first place. And I think it's very important as we think about information ethics, as we think about privacy, as we think about the relationship between information privacy about humans and civil liberties, that we cover both the decision to collect and the decision to use. If you think about a privacy policy at somewhere like Google, it says, like most privacy policies, here at Google, we care about your privacy, comma. And this document governs some of the ways in which we will use your data, right? It's about what they collect and how they use it. And that's an ordinary use of the term privacy by privacy lawyers. And fourth, privacy is a matter of degree. We often talk about privacy as the opposite of that which is public, so that things are either known to everybody, like the fact that Joe Biden is the president or Argentina won the last World Cup. I'm happy about one of those two things. I'll let you guess which one. Or there are things that are private. Those are the public things. There are things that are private, like a dream I had last night that I haven't told anybody. But actually, most of the time, for most people, most information is between the two poles of known to everybody in the world and known only to one person in the deepest recesses of their mind. And I think that our privacy thinking, our privacy talk, and our privacy law should meet that information where it is, which is in the messy middle. So privacy is a matter of degree. All right, so if privacy is up for grabs and is a matter of power, how do we protect it? First, we need to remember, once again, that privacy is fundamentally about power. Second, we need to recognize that struggles about privacy debates today, privacy debates in the 1960s about government databases, privacy debates in the 50s about government surveillance in the age of McCarthy, and the outing of gay people in Hollywood, privacy debates in the 1890s that spurred the writing of Warren and Brandeis's famous article, The Right to Privacy, for Harvard Law Review 193, in case you wanted to look it up. These are struggles about power. And we have had a conversation in this country and in the Western world broadly about the death of privacy since the late 19th century. Well, privacy hasn't died, but this talk of the death of privacy is actually how we manage our conversations, how we discuss, how we express our frustration and our aspirations about the changes in society that are coming from new information practices and the power effects those changes in practices have on ordinary people, whether it's African Americans in the 1930s being delighted that they could have a social security number because it meant they were full members of society in that way for the first time, whether it is victims of revenge pornography or non-consensual pornography being justifiably outraged that their intimate images are being disclosed. All of these conversations are about power, and they are policy conversations about the rules that we maybe should have to constrain that power, to include where appropriate, but also to avoid the sorts of harms that privacy violations can lead to. And so from that perspective, privacy rules of some sort are inevitable. If all of these things have to do with rules and choices that we face, and deciding to do nothing about privacy, just let the barons of Silicon Valley engage in disruptive innovation with our data. We just don't care. That's a choice, right? That, in a sense, is a rule to let things happen the way they are. There is no neutral position on what we do with human information. We have to make a choice where even doing nothing is making a choice. And we've been very good at making that choice. At least Congress has been very good at making that choice for the last 50 years. But if we do something, I hope we would do something, we need some guide stick or yardstick, guideposts by which to decide what rules to have, when to allow information to flow, when to allow information to be collected, when to prohibit its collection, when to regulate its use, when to mandate its disclosure, when to restrict its dissemination. And I think we should think about privacy instrumentally in terms of things it will get us to promote human values. And I want to suggest three of these. We won't have a lot of time to talk about it today. Happy to talk about it in the Q&A. Privacy enables us to form our identities, to figure out who we are and what we believe, free from the overbearing scrutiny of others. If you remember how unpleasant middle school was, that's sort of an insight into why privacy matters for figuring out who we are. You don't want all the other kids looking at you when you're trying to figure out what kind of person you are. Privacy matters to political freedom for reasons we've already talked about in connection with the Snowden revelations, and privacy matters to consumer protection and to a new generation of rules to protect consumers and allow them to flourish in the digital information-based economy. So that's what privacy is. Let me talk briefly about what privacy isn't. There's 4 myths in the book. I'm going to talk about a couple of these today, and I may skip over one to leave time for questions. So first of all, a lot of time we hear, well, I don't care about privacy because I have nothing to hide. And people with nothing to hide have nothing to fear. Now, leaving aside the fact that this phrase was coined by a literal Nazi, Joseph Goebbels, we'll take ideas based upon their quality rather than their horrific provenance here. This is a myth. Nothing to hide is wrong in its own terms, because first of all, everyone has something to hide. We treat matters of going to the toilet, of our sexuality, of our naked bodies, of our health as private. I noticed that you all wore clothes today. That you didn't come like this, which is a dream that many of us have. In addition, the need to share information with people we trust is a basic human impulse. We confide in our loved ones. We express our feelings to them. Even when they're intemperate and we don't really mean them, we share information, we vent, we ask for advice, we confide with others. We also do so with doctors. I mean, think about if you, we'll use myself as an example. So let's say, hypothetically speaking, I have a really unpleasant rash in an intimate part of my body, like on my backside or something. I want to get it looked at, literally. I go to the doctor. Maybe my regular doctor isn't there, so I'm waiting for a new doctor I've never met. I'm standing there wearing a backless gown and maybe 2 socks, and all of a sudden a doctor comes in and she says, you know, I'm Dr. Anderson. Never met her before, but I say, I've got this rash and it's right here, and you should take a look. Notice that this only works because we have a promise and an expectation of confidentiality backed by legal rules, backed by professional norms. We lawyers have the same relationships with our clients. But notice where there is privacy, I am much more willing to share all of the details about my condition so that she can treat me and so that I can get better, and then I will tell my friends, Dr. Anderson is a great dermatologist, and then other people will go to see her. But the promise of confidentiality, the protections of privacy, are what make the entire system work. Second, nothing to hide understands why privacy matters. You should know what's coming next. Privacy is not about hiding dark secrets. Privacy is fundamentally about power and the way that information can be used to influence other people. Third, nothing to hide focuses on privacy as an individual matter, whereas I talked at length to the faculty over lunch today, privacy is also a social value. We all benefit from living in a society where privacy is protected, just as we all benefited from living in a society where other people shielded their germs from us a few years ago at the height of the pandemic, right? Public health worked on a social level. It became quite antisocial and nasty at times, of course. But we all benefit from a society where other people have the opportunity to figure out who they are, what they believe, and offer new ideas for us and ways to improve society. As Snowden said, right, arguing you don't care about privacy because you got nothing to hide is no different than saying you don't care about free speech because you have nothing to say. Okay, second myth. A lot of people think, including my Uber driver, that privacy, I'm sorry about the slide, that privacy is about creepiness. And that's a natural, an understandable way of thinking about privacy, but I think it's problematic. So I prefer you don't use the word creepy in relation to privacy ever again, and here's why. Creepiness is a really bad yardstick for determining whether there is a privacy problem. First of all, creepiness is over-inclusive. Lots of things that seem creepy actually aren't and are good for us. In the 19th century, Robert Stevenson was the novelist, but James Stevenson invented the locomotive engine, and he set up a length of track for people to try it out. There was the engine, the rocket that you see here. Behind, you can just see in the picture, there's a passenger car, and these people trundled down the 400 meters of track or whatever it was at astonishing speeds of 20 miles an hour. Women fainted, men passed out, everyone screamed. People believed at the time that if human beings were to travel faster, say 30 miles an hour, it might kill them or damage important biological systems. Of course, they were freaked out traveling that quickly, but many of you have traveled faster than 30 miles an hour coming to be here today, even on the L. And this is an example of something that is new that turned out to be actually a good thing, rail travel. Though my son took the Amtrak from St. Louis to Chicago about 2 weeks ago, and I doubt the Amtrak got faster than about 20 miles an hour. It took him, it was a 27-hour day trip with his friends. Facebook's news feed was originally considered creepy, when actually the idea, there are a lot of I have a lot of problems with Facebook and a lot of problems with the way it builds its systems, but the actual idea of pushing relevant information in people's interests to them can actually be a valuable thing, just not the way Facebook implements it. Creepiness can also be under-inclusive, and this is more important. Lots of things that we don't think are creepy can still be problematic. So think about secret social scoring for law students. Imagine if the law school or the bar exam had an algorithm that was opaque to you, that was used to predict to determine whether or not you get into law school or whether you pass the bar exam. If you don't know about the secret algorithm, it's not creepy, but it's still a problem, and it's still a privacy problem. Creepiness also is malleable. Creepiness is a social response elicited to socially determined contextual stimuli. What is creepy changes over time. It changes based upon geography. It changes based upon culture. And it can be nudged and influenced and manipulated. We didn't used to think that standing in front of armed security guards with our hands in the position of surrender was a reasonable precondition to boarding a flight. Since 9/11, that norm has changed, and now I would imagine that the law students in the audience don't remember a time when you didn't have to subject yourselves to invasive security before you board a flight. I'm not saying it's unnecessary. I'm also not saying it's not unnecessary, and there's not just security theater most of the time. What I am saying is our reaction to this privacy practice, this searching of us, is socially contingent, and the norms in our society have changed in our lifetimes, at least for us older people here. In a rare moment of candor, the Google CEO, Eric Schmidt, admitted that Google policy is to get right up to the creepy line and to not cross it. In other words, we're going to do anything we want with information as long as it doesn't trigger people into thinking it's creepy, because if it does, then they might push back on us. But as long as they don't feel that something is creepy, we can basically do what we want. All right, so one response that companies have to this is to say, well, we'll just put you in control of your information. We'll create privacy dashboards and let you control what you want. Several problems with this. First of all, control is overwhelming. And this I should credit comes from some work that I've done with my colleague Woody Hartzog, as well as being in the book. It also relies actually on an excellent book by Nancy Kim, Professor Kim, who's in the audience, called Consentability, which I highly, highly recommend. But the idea is basically we put you in control by giving you a choice. Privacy on, privacy off. Of course, it looks a little bit more like this in actuality. This is iPad's old location privacy dashboard. There are multiple privacy dashboards on the iPad and on the iPhone and on your computer and in Hulu and in Netflix and in Facebook and in Twitter and all of the many digital services that you use, right? We can't remember all of our passwords. How can we remember the many diverse and constantly changing privacy settings we have on every one of those services for which we can't even remember our passwords? Control's also an illusion. I don't know, have you guys seen these blue triangles? Well, you've all seen these blue triangles because they appear on the corner of the ads that get served to you on the web. And the idea is you can choose what the right ad is for you. Now, you don't get the choice, though, of I don't want to have surveillance-based ads served to me, right? That choice isn't given to you. You only get the choices that you want, which is why control is actually an illusion, where the companies are actually in control of the choices that you get. And finally, control completes the creepy trap. So I have an interest in Irish cross-border data protection because of some work that I do. I wanted to read an article in the Irish Independent about regulations by the Irish regulator onto Facebook a few years ago. And this was the article that I pulled up on my phone. And of course, I got one of these, which is a cookie banner, putting me in control of my privacy. And normally, what do? We just, yes, I accept the cookies. I just want to see the article. But at this time, I was feeling feisty, so I thought, why not? I'm going to go and I'm going to see what happens. So this is what came up. We value your privacy. It always says that. They don't really mean it. You can set your consent preferences and determine how you want your data to be used based on the purposes below. You may set your preferences for us independently from those of third-party partners. Each purpose has a description so that you know how we and partners use your data. Do I want to store... Do we want to store and or access information? Disagree. Advertising and content measurement? Disagree. Personalized content? Disagree. Personalized ads? Always disagree. Social media? Disagree. Actively scan device characters for identification. That sounds horrible. Disagree. Use precise geolocation data. Disagree. Extended measurement. No idea what that is, but definitely disagree. So what you could do, though, was view our partners. And when you open that up, you get a list of 500 different partners that they share data with, each of which has one of these dashboards for it. So in the end, I just hit agree to all because it's just too much trouble, and it's impossible to use this illusion of control in order to protect my privacy. So I gave up. I resigned myself to accepting this. But notice what happened. I was given the opportunity to protect my privacy, even though it was insufficient, even though it was illusory, even though it would take my entire life in order to monitor all these privacy notices. But I say to myself, and we say to ourselves, well, they did give me a choice. So I suppose it's my fault that I didn't take steps to protect my privacy because I had that opportunity. And so as a result, the illusion of control completes the creepy trap. It's creepy, but I had a chance to fix things. They gave me the opportunity to control, and I turned it down. And so therefore, it's my fault, I guess. And this is nonsense. This is a designed, rigged game by marketers to get us to feel that way. And I think we can do better. Finally, privacy isn't dying. This is George Orwell's gravestone. Privacy isn't dying, but as I said before, it is up for grabs because privacy is about power. And all of the power effects come from all of these uses of human information or ones that are currently in flux and need to be contested, just not through privacy dashboards. Okay, final point, let me offer quickly 3 values that I think should guide our privacy rules for a new generation of laws. First of all, as I said, we shouldn't think about privacy as good in and of itself. I happen to think that it is good in and of itself, but it's not going to persuade people who are not persuadable on that. And so I think if we talk about other things that we agree we value, like identity, freedom, and protection, it's a stronger argument. It makes a more persuasive case for privacy. So what is the relationship between privacy and identity? So a few years ago, as Dean Krug pointed out, I wrote this book, Intellectual Privacy. And I made the argument that political freedom depends on protecting people from surveillance when they're in the process of generating ideas, when they are thinking, when they are reading, when they are speaking with confidence, particularly when they're using search engines and ebooks and web browsers and email that creates a record of their intellectual activity. I think we can also think about determining our identities more broadly than just politics into our personal beliefs and our personal values outside of policy questions. We have to engage as people. Teenagers do this the most, but all of us do this every day in what Julie Cohen calls the processes of play. We try on new identities. We try on, and again, right, teenagers do this all the time. Today I'm going to be a punk. Today I am an athlete. Today whatever it is, the process of identity formation and development happens throughout our lives, and it happens through social play and playing with roles. Now, it also enables us to determine our identities, to figure out who we are. This is someone who wears a suit even less often than I do. When Mark Zuckerberg was summoned to Congress to respond to the Cambridge Analytica investigations, I think in 2017, this is him here. He was reminded that he had said, you have one identity. The days of you having a different image for your work friends or coworkers and for the other people you know are probably coming to an end pretty quickly. Having 2 identities for yourself is an example of a lack of integrity. That's how Facebook has viewed identity formation. It's much easier to code that way. It just assumes away the humanity in our relationships with other people. It's nonsense. Everybody plays different social roles every day, whether they're professional roles, whether they're personal roles, or whether they're anonymous, right? That we are all constantly navigating relationships as parents and children and coworkers and employees, patrons at coffee shops and restaurants, passengers on the L. And privacy is necessary to keep separate and to play each of these roles that we play every day of our lives. And when social networks force us into unitary identities, like the idea that there's a binary world of people, in Zuckerberg world maybe, people who are my friends and people who are not my friends. Of course, it's much more complicated than that. When they put us into filter bubbles and when they expose elements about our lives without our control, without our ability to anticipate it, it can cause significant harm, and it can stifle and deter the free and unfettered development of our identities. Freedom. The linkages between privacy and democratic political freedom are sort of obvious in our society. This is the easiest case that I will make to you today. Of course, the cultural touchstones of things like George Orwell's Big Brother are salient. There is empirical evidence that when people are watched, they behave differently. This is a study from WashU that found that apparently retail theft by employees of restaurants is a really big deal. People who work at Applebee's love stealing money from the cash register. So they did an experiment where they told people at Applebee's, we're watching you with IT software, and we're watching to see if you'll steal from the cash register. Turned out, when they knew they were being watched, people stole less. The great thing about the study, they didn't stop stealing because they just couldn't help themselves, but they stopped stealing as frequently. This also happens to web surfing and to engaging with ideas. When we know we're being watched, as happened after the Snowden revelations, people around the world searched less often for things like Al-Qaeda and Islam and what is a dirty bomb. They also searched less for reproductive health services, am I fat, do I have an eating disorder, divorce lawyer, and other things that are legal but socially disfavored. When we are watched, when we know we're being watched, we act differently, and that is true in personal matters and it is true in political matters as well. And as lawyers, we call this a chilling effect. And that's really what the Snowden revelations revealed. And when we think about not just the chilling effect, but the use of data to influence and to manipulate people, as happened during the Cambridge Analytica revelations, or Cambridge Analytica scandal, I think we need to worry much more significantly about the ways in which disinformation, targeted political advertising, the same technologies, incidentally, that are used to sell us hotel rooms and brands of shoes and purses and cars through surveillance-based advertising more generally, we need to worry about the ways in which these technologies can be used to disrupt and influence and damage our politics in a democratic society, as the people in Korea discovered all too recently, when it turned out that their intelligence services had used psychological warfare techniques on their own democracy in order to try to get elected the candidate that they thought would be best for South Korea's national security. And that is inconsistent, I would argue, with political freedom. Okay. Finally, privacy is necessary to consumer protection. When I was a child, my father, I was actually in Sarasota at the weekend. I saw this painting, hung this painting on our dining room wall, and it's a painting by L.S. Lowry, who was the sort of iconic painter of the English Industrial Revolution. Many of Lowry's paintings, they feature these matchstick people going everywhere, but they're also best known for all the sort of the beautiful English summer days they depict. Right, the smokestacks billowing smoke into the background. The north of England, where I grew up, is the first place on earth to have experienced the Industrial Revolution, to have experienced challenges to existing legal rules involving workplace safety, environmental protection, workplace discrimination. Think about the car. Think about the number of rules that are necessary to regulate the car, which is tremendous. We all like cars, but they're a tremendous source of danger and risk and death. Seatbelt rules, emission standards, even the rule we have to drive on the right side of the road or the left side of the road. It actually doesn't matter which side of the road we drive on, as long as we all agree we're going to stick to that side. I mean, the left is better, but we are outvoted as Britons in that respect. It's just us and the Israelis, I think, who are continuing to drive on the left. But all of these rules took a long time to put into effect to deal with the complex consumer protection problems of the Industrial Revolution. Today, facing the information revolution, we have a similar set of problems, and we're going to need a lot of legal regimes to govern the information revolution. But we have this terrible set of rules in place for privacy right now for consumers called notice and choice. And basically, notice and choice means if you want to do stuff with data as a company, you can do what you want as long as you hide it in a privacy policies which manage to be both dense and vague at the same time, and you give consumers some choice, where the choice can be something as simple as, I'm just not going to use Amazon, or I'm not going to use social networking, or I'm not going to use the internet, right? So choice is an illusion, and notice is a fiction. That's not good enough, and I think what we need to do is to think about moving towards, just as we should regulate information where it really is, we should protect consumers where they really are. Something I call in the book a situated consumer, a consumer that is not an abstract product of neoclassical microeconomic theory making rational choices all the time, but a consumer who is sometimes irrational, perhaps predictably irrational in ways that behavioral science points out. A consumer that has limited resources of time, money, and attention. A consumer that is harried, that is frazzled, that is just trying to read the article and doesn't want to spend 90 minutes protecting or sort of tweaking their largely ineffective privacy settings anyway. But a consumer that has a lot of things to do, that is already overburdened by modern post-pandemic life, and who sometimes is distracted or has a screaming child in front of them or is maybe even a little bit drunk. We should build our consumer protection rules for people as they really are, not as neoclassical microeconomic theory would like them to be, because it makes the model easier to write equations for. And to do that, I think we need to build trust in our digital services, and I think we can, this is a paper I wrote with a colleague a couple of years ago, to make sure that we can trust these services to invest them with our data, to invest them with our experiences, to show vulnerability to them in ways that are meaningful and in ways that we will not be betrayed. When we do that, ironically, we share more information with companies. We share better information with companies because we know we're much less likely to be betrayed, exposed, manipulated, and otherwise harmed. We need to have a meaningful reassurance from companies that they have our backs. And not that they're just looking to exploit us and manipulate us and betray us the first opportunity they get, that we're not dangling from the strings of the informational controls of the Mark Zuckerbergs of the world. And that what we have is meaningful, sustainable trust that is profitable for consumers and for companies. And so that's what I think our modern system of consumer protection is like. So to sum up, I've talked about what privacy is and what privacy isn't. I offered 3 values that I think should guide our privacy rules into the future. But the most important thing is recognizing that privacy is fundamentally about power, that we need to worry about the rules that constrain that power, the inevitability of some choice for those rules, and we should build those rules to protect human values that we cherish, to maximize the benefits of the information revolution while minimizing its costs. Ultimately, what we need to do is to recognize privacy for what it really is, a fundamental right that is necessary for us to flourish as human beings in a digital world. Because information is power, and because we are living in an information society, in that information society, our privacy, the ways in which information can be used to manipulate us, to betray us, to coerce us, to nudge us, and maybe also to improve our lives if it's properly channeled, is very much the whole ballgame. And so ultimately, that's why privacy matters. Thank you. I've gone on a little bit longer than I intended because, as you can tell, I'm really passionate about these issues. But we have time for 10 minutes of questions or so, if people have questions. In the back.
come from the UK. Have you noticed differing cultural expectations around digital privacy, high privacy versus low privacy countries?
So let me resist the question and then try and answer it, because I think it's a great question. I wouldn't categorize countries as high privacy or low privacy along one dimension. I think there are ways in which British society or Dutch society, where I've spent a lot of time too, have greater commitments to privacy than the United States. And there are ways in which it is lesser. I mean, I think so Britain actually has a strong, certainly has more CCTV cameras and fewer protections against them, but it also has a version of the GDPR that is in effect that regulates commercial data gathering. I think the things that different countries find to be private are different, but I think ultimately it still boils down to the basic proposition, which is that information about us can be used to harm us, just like, say, children. There's a lot of, and I discuss this in the book, I didn't have time for it today, there's a lot of discussion, particularly about 10 years ago, kids today, they don't care about privacy. They're not agitated by the Snowden revelations. Hey, but you know what? Those teenagers might not be worried about the NSA, but they still close the door on their bedroom so they can be alone with their friends. They still close the door on the bathroom. They still use Finstagrams and alternative forms of communication because they can't go outside and hang out with their friends as much as people of my generation were allowed to do. In other words, they still care about privacy, but they care about privacy more against the authority figures in their life, who are their parents, their peers, their teachers, and their coaches, more than they care about the relatively abstract groups of marketers and government agencies. And so I think, to quote the title of another great book on privacy by Dana Boyd, it's complicated, but I do think there are meaningful differences. But ultimately, a lot of those differences boil down to perceptions of threat. And I think in Europe, in continental Europe, the specter of World War II casts a long shadow. I'm not sure if that's a mixed metaphor. Specters can cast shadows, or specters are shadows themselves. But the specter of World War II is present, and so they are particularly concerned about government surveillance. I know in Germany, for instance, they have much stricter rules against government surveillance, whereas in Britain, in which the government wasn't the enemy during World War II, there's much more permissiveness to those rules because they trust them more. Whether that's accurate or not, I think is a different question. But that's how I tend to think about these questions: is they do vary, but they ultimately do boil down to power. Nancy, I think you had your hand up also.
You don't. You discuss the need for consumer protection, and if privacy is power, money is also power. And do you think that there's hope given how much money is involved here at this point? The fact that we haven't been able to stop this, and now there's just so much money involved that you hear, you had Zuckerberg up there, and he's just historically been very famous for being very manipulative in framing things a particular way. And isn't it all about money? And how are we going to address that issue? Because it's only going to get worse with AI.
So that's a great question. Are we all doomed? Where is the
in a capitalist
the source
society
of optimism? So I am optimistic about this. We were actually talking about this at dinner last night. I remain optimistic, and the reason I remain optimistic actually goes back to what I was talking about with respect to the Industrial Revolution. So let's say you are a factory worker in Manchester, in England, in 1870, right? You work in the mill, you work 11 hours a day, 6 or 7 days a week. You live in a tenement house in urban Manchester. You eat a white diet, as it was called. Your entire diet is bread, bacon fat, and weak tea with lots of milk. And that's essentially, you have gout, your children are unhappy, you have limited education, you have no social power. That's That's A, a breeding ground for a communist revolution, which was happening at the time, but B, it's a very pessimistic story. And I think we faced similar challenges 130, 150 years ago in the Industrial Revolution, and we were able to deal with them. We didn't fix them all. We certainly didn't get a handle on environmental problems, and we're sort of paying some of the penalties for that now. But we were able to build what the historian Paul Polanyi called a protective counter-movement. Consumer protection law, workplace safety rules, environmental regulations, clean water, clean air, things in the United States like the Food and Drug Act to make sure that the food we purchase the food we purchase in shops that is the product of the industrial food chain is on the whole not going to poison us or give us diseases. Took a long time, and I think one of the lessons of the last 50 years is the neoliberal whittling away and privatization of many of these public benefiting protections has had its own costs as well. So I don't mean I share your description of the world and the accuracy of the description of the world, but I am optimistic because we did this before and we can do it again. And I think what we're seeing in conversations about privacy regulation, what was called the techlash a few years ago, is bipartisan recognition at a time when we can agree on so few things in a bipartisan way, that the power of information is significant and needs to be brought within check to improve people's lives. And so there's a lot of work to be done, but I am hopeful that we are going to be able to bring this in check. Do I believe we're going to be able to solve all these problems? No. But I think we will, as we always have done, muddle through. But I think in order to do that, we have to recognize that this is really a problem, and use our imagination to come up with the same sort of multi-layered progressive response to the problems of the information age, including inventing new bodies of law that we did 150 years ago and continue to today for the problems of the industrial age. Charlie Ann, I think you had a... No. Privacy is not dying, but it is up for grabs, and we're only doomed if we choose to be.
What I'm also hearing you say is that this problem must rest on the shoulders of the next generation of lawyers and regulators, correct?
That's correct.
Who else is, what is the solution? You've identified the doom and the problem, so what is the solution to get law schools to teach about this potential disaster, to encourage lawyers to pursue this arena?
Yeah, those are the solutions. I mean, that's part of it. It's for documentary filmmakers and creators of culture to create the kinds of cultural touchstones to, I think Black Mirror is very powerful in this respect, the way 1984 was very powerful for the problems of totalitarianism. It's a multi-pronged problem with a multi-pronged solution. What we can do as lawyers is to do what happens at my law school in St. Louis and this law school here, is students work on these questions, hiring faculty who are expert in it, and ultimately I think, and this is maybe, I see the dean is standing up, as good a point as any on which to end at a great law school. I think the key is, as we adapt our methods of training and instruction, as we adapt our scholarship to these new problems, the key is equipping students not just with a knowledge of what the law is, or even with the ability to think like a lawyer, though that's really important too, but with the habits of mind, with the curiosity, with the flexibility, with the technical understanding, and with the moral imagination to be able to practice, to be able to work as ethical professionals in bodies of law that don't exist yet, dealing with technologies that don't exist yet, but always, I think, to try and protect human values, and I think those are much less subject to change than things like the latest operating system or the latest kinds of information or facial recognition technologies.
Well, on that note, please join me in thanking Professor Neil Richards for his wonderful public lecture this afternoon, and thanks again for coming out for it.
Thank you for coming.
Really appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure.